The dull hum of the freighter's engines was a comforting background to Captain Adrian Vale's solitude. It was a run-of-the-mill supply haul to the outer verge, nothing he hadn't done a dozen times before. The bridge was empty, save for him, and the quiet stream of sensor data scrolling across his console. He had his feet up, a well-thumbed datapad in one hand, sipping lukewarm synth coffee when the distress call cut through the monotony. A burst of static made him sit up. His first thought was a routine malfunction, or some old buoy playing back, a centuries-dead signal. But when the message repeated, garbled but distinctly desperate, Adrian snapped into action. His fingers flew over the console, isolating the source and running a deeper analysis. Unregistered signal, he muttered, leaning in. No ID stamp, no fleet verification. The voice on the other end was shaky, heavily accented. Not human. Help. Attack. Children. Please. The words were fragmented, broken up by bursts of static, but the panic in the tone was unmistakable. Adrian's gut twisted. He knew the verge could be dangerous. Pirates, rogue AI skiffs, even old, automated defense drones with broken targeting protocols. Whatever was out there, it had clearly torn apart whoever this was. He glanced at his navigational readout, pinpointing the distress beacon's location. It was off his designated route, far enough that diverting to investigate would cost him time and put him at odds with his orders. He hesitated for only a moment before issuing the command to reroute. Computer, plot a direct course to that beacon. Captain Vale, the computer replied smoothly. Altering your course will. Delay, override fleet directives, he cut in. Give me the fastest route. Prep weapon systems and activate external comms. The freighter wasn't heavily armed. Just a few turrets and shields strong enough to withstand debris fields. But Adrian had learned how to improvise. The ship's reinforced hull and upgraded sublight engines were proof of his knack for staying one step ahead of trouble. It was why he'd been given command of a ship at all. And right now, trouble was on the other end of that signal. As he drew closer, the faint glimmer of a distressed vessel appeared in the viewport. The transport was battered, its hull scorched and venting atmosphere in small but steady streams. Adrian's sensors confirmed a large number of life signs aboard. Most were faint and scattered, clustered tightly in the ship's rear compartments, but the distress signal had originated from the bridge. Unidentified vessel, this is Captain Adrian Vale, he said, his voice steady. I'm moving to dock. What's your status? A crackle answered him, then a soft, trembling voice. This is Zavia, guardian of the Teliar children. We are all that remains. She paused, her breath catching. Please, our ship is failing. We can't. Don't worry, Adrian said firmly. I'll get you out of here. Hold on. He adjusted his ship's position, expertly aligning it with the broken transport's airlock. The auto-docking clamps engaged, and a moment later, the airlock, light switched from red to green. Adrian grabbed his utility pack, holstered his sidearm, not that he wanted to use it, but experience taught him to be prepared, and headed for the hatch. When it cycled open, the air that rushed in was thin and cold. The corridor beyond was dimly lit, flickering emergency lights casting long shadows. Zavia stood just a few meters in, her figure illuminated by the faint blue glow of her people's bioluminescent skin. She was tall and willowy, her silvery skin seeming to shimmer as she turned to face him. Her amber eyes, wide and filled with both relief and exhaustion, met his own. You came, she said softly. Her voice was heavier in person, carrying a weight that no signal could convey. We didn't think. She trailed off, looking past him toward his ship. Adrian gave her a quick nod. I'm here. How many kids are on board? 200. Zavia's voice cracked. I was their ambassador, their teacher. After the attack I became their protector, but I'm not trained for this. You're doing fine, Adrian assured her, motioning for her to follow as he moved further into the corridor. The freighter's internal sensors were already scanning for leaks and dangerous pressure zones, giving him a map of the most stable paths. Let's get these kids on my ship, we'll figure it out from there. SciFi hesitated, then nodded. This way. Most are in the lower decks. As they walked, Adrian couldn't shake the heavy weight settling in his chest. The ship wasn't just damaged, it was a graveyard. He passed the remains of what must have been the Teliar crew, a mix of charred uniforms and still lifeless bodies. He could see why SciFi had felt so hopeless, why her voice had been so desperate. But now that he was here, he'd be damned if he let these kids share the same fate. Don't worry, Adrian said, more to himself than to SciFi. We'll keep them safe. No one's touching these kids again. SciFi turned to him, her expression a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. Thank you, Captain Vale. Adrian adjusted the strap of his utility pack. Just call me Adrian, let's get your kids home. The cargo bay was no place for passengers, certainly not for 200 alien children, but Captain Adrian Vale didn't have many options. Rows of metal crates and barrels had been hastily shoved aside to make room, creating a rough gathering area in the freighter's cavernous lower hold. The Teliar children huddled in tight groups, their luminous skin casting faint glows against the dull steel walls. Some were silent and still, their wide, gold-tinged eyes staring blankly at nothing. Others whimpered softly, clinging to one another or to the tattered scraps of blankets SciFi had carried over from their own ship. Adrian leaned against a stack of crates, his arms crossed, watching the scene unfold. His translator module strained to make sense of the cacophony of languages. The Teliar dialects varied wildly, not just regional differences but entirely separate linguistic branches. The translator caught bits and pieces, cries for missing siblings, confused murmurs about where they were, questions too advanced or too alien for the machine to process. He tapped the earpiece, cycling through the translator's limited settings. It was no use. Captain, SciFi's voice broke through his focus. She approached with the careful poise of someone who knew she couldn't afford to show fear. Thank you again for all of this. I don't know how we'd... Her voice caught, but she quickly regained control. How we'd manage without your help. You're managing better than most people would, Adrian said, nodding toward the children. They look up to you. They trust you. They have no one else, she said simply. She stood next to him, her arms crossed in a mirror of his stance, watching the children. We lost all of our senior caretakers in the attack. The pirates, she exhaled sharply, closing her eyes for a moment. I wasn't prepared for this, Adrian. I was their cultural liaison, their diplomat, not their guardian. You're more of a guardian than you think, Adrian said. He glanced at her, catching the faint shimmer of her skin under the bay's dim lights. You got them this far. That says a lot. SciFi didn't reply immediately. She watched as one of the older children, barely a teenager by Adrian's estimation, offered a scrap of dried fruit to a younger one, a small tentative act of kindness in the midst of chaos. I used to tell them stories, SciFi said after a moment, back when we were still on our world. Tales of heroes, of the Teliar, who protected our people in ancient times. I thought they were just myths. She laughed softly, bitterly. Now they look at me like I'm supposed to be one of those heroes. Maybe you are, Adrian said. He pushed off the crates and motioned for her to follow. Come on. Let's check the damage report on your ship. I need to know how bad it is before I can plan our next move. SciFi trailed him to the engineering console, where the refugee transport's diagnostics were displayed in shaky detail. Hull integrity was at 25%. Environmental controls were on the brink of total failure. The ship's main power core was barely stable, held together by hasty patches and prayers. Adrian ran a hand through his hair, squinting at the readings. Not great, but I've seen worse. We can fix this if we have enough time and parts. I thought you were a freighter captain, SciFi said. Not an engineer. I've worn a lot of hats, Adrian replied. Sometimes you have to, out here on the fringe. Do you think? SciFi hesitated, her fingers brushing the edge of the console. Do you think we'll have that time? Adrian met her gaze. The uncertainty in her eyes mirrored the question that had been gnawing at him since he'd first answered the distress call. The pirates had ambushed them once. They knew the refugee ship's course. They wouldn't give up easily, not when they'd already invested so much in attacking them. And if the pirates came back, Adrian's freighter would be the only thing standing between the Teliar children and another slaughter. I'll give you that time, Adrian said firmly. One way or another, I'll keep them safe. SciFi's lips parted slightly as if she wanted to say more, but she stopped herself. Instead, she nodded. Thank you, Adrian. Truly. Adrian nodded back, turning his attention to the console. He started making a list. Parts he'd need from the spare supplies, repairs that could be done in transit, and tasks that might keep the older children busy and distracted. As he worked, he felt SciFi's presence at his side, a steadying force in the midst of so much uncertainty. In the cargo bay, the children's soft voices continued to murmur, their faint glow casting rippling patterns on the walls. As Adrian and SciFi made their plans, the ship sailed on through the dark reaches of space, a fragile sanctuary for the young lives it carried. The warning klaxons started their wail just as Adrian and SciFi finished patching a tear in the refugee ship's power relays. Adrian froze mid-motion, gripping the worn edge of a control panel. SciFi straightened from her crouched position, her shimmering skin glowing faintly in the flickering emergency lights. Pirates, Adrian said under his breath. His hands were already moving, tapping commands into his wrist console. The freighter's external cameras flickered to life, showing a series of fast-moving blips closing in from the edge of the asteroid field. Damn it. They must have picked up on our signal boost during the repairs. SciFi's golden eyes were wide but steady. What do we do? Adrian looked at her, then at the frightened children huddling in the cargo bay on the monitor. We run. The freighter's engines roared to life as Adrian took the helm, the refugee ship tethered to the cargo bay with barely stable docking clamps. He pushed the engines to their limits, streaking into the asteroid field that surrounded the nearby binary stars. Bright twin suns lit the debris-choked expanse, turning every spinning rock into a dazzling kaleidoscope of deadly light. This isn't a warship, Adrian muttered as he worked the controls. But I've got a few tricks up my sleeve. SciFi, seated beside him, scanned the sensor readout. There are 3 pirate ships gaining on us, 2 fast interceptors and a larger cruiser. Their firepower is enough to turn us into scrap if they catch us, Adrian finished. Hold tight, I'll keep us ahead. The freighter plunged into the asteroid field, weaving between tumbling rocks and sharp-edged debris. Adrian's fingers danced over the controls, firing thrusters in short bursts, using the natural obstacles to block line of sight for the pirates' weapons. SciFi watched in amazement as Adrian maneuvered the ungainly cargo ship like a fighter, banking hard around massive asteroids and skimming just above jagged surfaces. They're still closing in, SciFi said, her voice calm but urgent. Their interceptors are too fast. Adrian grimaced. Then we'll have to make them slow down. With a flick of a switch, he brought up a set of improvised countermeasures, repurposed mining charges and salvage drones loaded with scrap metal. He deployed them into the asteroid field. creating a cloud of debris and shrapnel in their wake. The leading pirate interceptor collided with the cloud, its shields flaring and engines sputtering. The second interceptor slowed to avoid a similar fate, giving Adrian a precious few seconds to widen the gap. But the cruiser was still a problem. It emerged from the debris field, its larger shields shrugging off the countermeasures. A low warning tone signaled an incoming missile lock. "Missile incoming," SciFi called out. Adrian didn't hesitate. "Hold on." He dove the freighter into a tight spin, using the asteroids as cover. The missile streaked past and detonated against a large rock, sending fragments cascading into the cruiser's shields. Adrian took the chance to redirect power from his engines to the ship's rear shields, bracing for the cruiser's next barrage. As the freighter shuddered from a glancing hit, SciFi's hands flew over the auxiliary console. She quickly rerouted power to stabilize the life support systems, then turned her attention to the sensors. "There's a denser field of debris ahead near the binary stars. If we can navigate it, they might have to break off pursuit." Adrian glanced at her, a flash of admiration breaking through the tension. "Good call. Plotting a course now." The freighter dove deeper into the asteroid field, where the light of the binary stars created a brilliant but treacherous maze. SciFi called out asteroid positions and potential escape vectors as Adrian executed sharp turns and sudden bursts of speed. The pirates tried to follow, but their larger cruiser struggled to match the nimble maneuvers. Adrian used the terrain to his advantage, guiding the freighter through narrow passes and over jagged peaks. "They're falling behind," SciFi said, her voice steady with relief. Adrian pushed the engines harder. "We just need to keep it that way." The freighter emerged from the densest part of the field, and the pirates, now wary of further ambushes and the volatile environment, finally broke off. Adrian let out a long breath as the warning klaxons fell silent. He eased back, the throttle allowing the ship's systems to cool. SciFi turned to him, her luminous features softening. "You saved us. Again." Adrian managed a weary smile. "I couldn't have done it without your quick thinking." SciFi hesitated, then placed a hand lightly on his shoulder. "Thank you, Adrian. I don't know how we would have survived this without you." He met her gaze, the gratitude in her golden eyes making the exhaustion and stress of the battle fade just a little. For the first time in years, Adrian felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel: hope. The silence after the battle was profound, broken only by the faint hum of the freighter's engines. With the pirate threat temporarily behind them, Adrian finally had the chance to take stock of their situation. The refugee ship was still tethered to his freighter, its systems barely functioning despite his earlier efforts. Supplies were running low, and he knew that their current trajectory couldn't be a straight shot. If they wanted to find a safe haven, it would require careful planning, patience, and a whole lot of luck. He sat on the bridge, poring over star charts, routes, and secure transmission logs, looking for a place that might serve as a new home for the Teliar children. SciFi joined him, standing just over his shoulder. She leaned against the console, her shimmering skin catching the faint light of the stars outside the viewport. "Have you found anything?" she asked, her voice quiet but steady. Adrian glanced up at her, then gestured to the screen. "There are a few potential options. Some colonies that aren't well known, a couple of unregistered habitable moons, but nothing guaranteed. Most of these places would still need some kind of support system to keep the kids healthy." He leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "And there's no guarantee the pirates won't keep sniffing us out." SciFi crossed her arms, her expression thoughtful. "We've survived this far. We'll survive longer if we must." Her resolve was unwavering, and Adrian couldn't help but admire that. Even now, with no concrete destination, she stood firm in her duty to the children. She'd been diplomat, protector, teacher, and now, perhaps reluctantly, a leader. He nodded, pulling up another map. I've been looking at this moon here. It's a little off the grid, but it's got a stable atmosphere and some potential for self-sustainability. It might not be perfect, but it's better than floating in deep space forever. SciFi moved closer, studying the map. Her luminous fingers brushed against the console. What about the environment? Will it support our biology? I've cross-checked what I could, Adrian said. It's not a match to your homeworld, but it's close enough that the children should be able to adapt with some help. We'd have to start from scratch, though. No prefab buildings, no infrastructure, just land, air, and water. That may be all we need, she said softly. Someplace we can call our own. They fell into a rhythm as they prepared for the journey. Adrian set about recalibrating the navigation systems to avoid pirate-heavy sectors, charting a path through unpopulated areas of space. SciFi worked tirelessly among the children, organizing them into small groups and assigning tasks, teaching the older ones how to assist in repairs, how to conserve food and water, how to look after the youngest. At first, the children were hesitant and unsure, but with SciFi's gentle guidance, they began to settle into something resembling a routine. Adrian marveled at her ability to comfort and inspire them despite her own exhaustion. Every time he passed through the cargo bay, he saw her crouched among the children, offering reassuring words, sharing bits of their history, and telling them of the world they would one day call home. It wasn't all smooth sailing. The freighter's engines strained as they detoured around a dying star, and one of the refugee ship's life support modules failed entirely. Adrian had to spend long hours patching together a temporary solution with SciFi at his side, holding a flashlight steady, handing him tools, and asking pointed questions that often led to clever workarounds. During one particularly late repair session, as Adrian wiped sweat from his forehead and tested the stability of the jury-rigged system, SciFi spoke quietly. "You didn't have to do this, you know. Answer our distress call. Risk your ship, your life." Adrian didn't look up immediately. He finished tightening the last panel, then sat back on his heels. "Someone had to. I couldn't just leave you out there. Not after hearing those voices." She studied him in the dim light, her expression unreadable. "You're a good man, Adrian Vale." "I try," he said with a faint smile. "Not sure I always succeed." "I think you do," she replied, her voice soft but certain. They sat there for a moment, the faint hum of the patched systems filling the quiet. Finally, Adrian stood and offered her a hand up. "Come on, let's check the nav system. If we keep at it, we might actually reach this new home of yours before the week's out." SciFi smiled, a rare but welcome sight, and followed him back to the bridge. Together, they charted the final leg of their journey. And though the future was still uncertain, Adrian felt a spark of hope each time their shoulders brushed, each time her voice steadied his resolve. They were heading toward the unknown, but they weren't doing it alone. The freighter touched down on the forested moon's surface with a heavy thud. The stabilizers groaned under the strain of carrying two ships, but the engines finally cycled down, leaving an unexpected stillness. Adrian leaned forward in the captain's chair, studying the landscape beyond the viewport. Rolling hills blanketed in green stretched toward distant mountains. Two pale suns shone overhead, their light filtering through a thin lavender haze that gave the sky an ethereal glow. The moon was raw, untamed, and untouched, a perfect place to begin anew. Adrian exhaled, realizing he'd been holding his breath. "We made it," he said quietly. Behind him, SciFi's presence was as steadying as ever. She stood just behind his chair, gazing out at the scene with an expression that held both wonder and determination. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "And it's ours?" "It's ours," Adrian said, turning to face her. "No major settlements, no mining operations, just open land and breathable air. You'll need to establish a base, but you can make this place what you want." Her gaze remained on the horizon for a long moment before she looked down at him. "You've given us hope," she said softly. Adrian rubbed the back of his neck, a little embarrassed under the weight of her words. "I just got you here. The rest is up to you." "No, you've done more than that," Zavia insisted. "You answered when no one else did. You fought for us, protected us, believed in us." Her voice dropped, more of a confession than a statement. "I don't know if I would have made it through all this without you." Adrian stood, turning, to face her fully. He was close enough now to see the faint shimmer of her skin, the way her amber eyes glowed faintly in the light. "You're stronger than you think," he said. "But I'm glad I was here. For them. For you." The silence that stretched between them felt different this time. It wasn't uncomfortable or strained. It was heavy with unspoken understanding. The tension that had been building since the moment he first heard her voice over the comm now sat between them, fragile and yet undeniable. Zavia reached out, her fingers just barely brushing his. "Adrian, I know we're different. From different worlds, different species, but in the time we've spent together, She hesitated, her composure faltering for the first time since he'd met her. "I care for you. More than I thought. More than I thought I should." Adrian felt his chest tighten, a mix of surprise and something warmer, deeper. He tried to keep his distance, to focus on the mission, the children, the crisis. But Zavia's presence had been a constant source of strength, her determination inspiring him in ways he hadn't allowed himself to acknowledge until now. He smiled, faintly but sincerely. "I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel the same way." Zavia's lips parted slightly, the hint of a smile playing at the corners. "Then, what happens now?" Adrian glanced back out the viewport at the vast, untamed land stretching out before them. "Now we build. We help these kids grow, thrive, find a new home, and we see where this goes. Together. Together." The word lingered in the air, wrapping around them like a promise. Zavia stepped closer, her hand resting lightly against his. For the first time since he'd found her and the children drifting in space, she allowed herself to hope, not just for her people's future, but for her own. And as the cargo bay doors opened, allowing the children to step out onto their new homeworld for the first time, Adrian and Zavia followed. The sounds of laughter, cautious at first but growing stronger, filled the air. The children ran, tumbled, and explored, their fear slowly melting away as they realized they were safe. They had a place to call home. Adrian stood beside Zavia, watching the scene unfold. The children's glowing skin caught the twin sun's light, casting shimmering reflections across the meadow. Zavia turned to him, her expression one of quiet joy. He reached for her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. Whatever came next, pirates, challenges, the inevitable